Merry Christmas.
Um,
It's,
yeah,
I did admit to you that I just went with the biggest one I could find for my cup of tea for Café CLIL LT 18
yeah,
CLIL INSETT. Phil, welcome.
that's right. Welcome. And why should we stick to the seasons? I mean, let's be flexible. And I'm here actually in England. It's a rare one. I'm usually
Yeah,
delivering the podcast from the Basque Country. So Niall, Norwich Institute of Language Education
yeah.
in Norwich.
It's
Famous
the
place.
magic of the technology, isn't it? That we can connect wherever. And
It
I
is.
also think it's something that we will do more of, I think, because as we bring other people in,
Yep.
and you and I are off doing other things, why
Yes.
not? Let's do it from classrooms you're in or hotel rooms or whatever, and as long as we've
Yeah.
got things to talk about. And today's theme, have you got a poster there?
In the
CLIL
classroom.
Victory.
Look, yeah. That's right. What to say? Um, CLIL victories. CLIL victories. It's wonderful. Yeah. Things
Yeah.
you're looking forward to. CLIL victories. But with little post-its. Post-its. Post-its are wonderful things, aren't they?
They are. I mean, let's come back to the post-its thing because we are going to talk about teacher development, ongoing teacher development,
Right.
in-service teacher training.
Yep.
So we're not talking about pre-service. We're talking about practicing teachers. And I
Mhm.
and I made a few notes, and I thought, obviously you and I are going to share our own CLIL training experiences,
Mm.
previous trainings that have made an impression on us.
Yep.
The other thing to talk about is also length, because you're there for like weekly blocks with teachers, and we might have 1 hour online sessions that need to be shared in terms of size and scope. And what can you do in so much time? 2 week courses. I do have teachers who come for
Mhm.
2 weeks,
Yeah. Yes.
And then the other aspect of length is I offer an online course which is 10 weeks, but drip by drip, so they I sort of flipped it and put stuff in a YouTube channel that they access, and then do a task, and then we meet face to face at the end of that.
Mhm.
So that's the other aspect is, and then the other thing is bespoke trainings, Phil. When
Mm.
people ask for specific kind of content, such
Yeah.
as I mean, the UN SDGs, for example, are a favorite at the moment with Erasmus teachers. Inclusive education, intercultural community competence in education. And then you've got subject specific where you've got whole groups who are all from the same
Mhm.
curriculum area, or likewise, they may not be. They may be paired with an English teacher from a variety of subject areas. And then, of course, we got the age range, which you and I talked about previously. So very young learners, preschoolers, primary schoolers, secondary schoolers, kind of higher secondary vocational education, and adults.
Yes. I mean, that shows you the, as you say, the scope and range of, CLIL training possibilities and the kind of people you can encounter. If it might be bespoke, as you say, and it might be quite
Mm,
general, or it might be sort of in the middle.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Why don't you say a few words about exactly what you're doing right now, hot off the press? What's been going on in your training room this week?
hot off the press. Yeah, I'm here, as I say, in Norwich, in England, and I'm training a group of this one here. She just come in, training a group of Swiss. Well, most of them are Swiss, who work in the German-speaking Swiss canton in sort of CLIL in vocational education.
Yeah.
But as you're implying, I mean, there are people who listen to this who are vocational educational teachers, and those and well, Andreas, who's been on here,
Yeah.
Andreas kind of knows more than me about it. I mean, you've also done this, but to say they're vocational education teachers doesn't give you anywhere near the picture of what you need to cater for, because as you were saying before, some of them are subject specialists. So
Yeah.
I've got people who work in catering. It looks a bit ESP, but
Absolutely.
I've got people who do technology. There are scientists. There are food scientists. And then there's the more
Yeah.
generalists. They're called ABUs. And so the ABUs tend to
What
be
does that
more.
stand for?
I've forgotten. It's German.
Okay.
I
Okay.
could I could have asked Victoria, but she's gone.
Okay.
Um,
They're generalists. Yeah.
Well, in the sense that the content is more social science, so it's maybe
Okay.
a bit of legal stuff about Switzerland, the economy of Switzerland, and then but they also look at look at more ethical stuff and a bit of philosophy, but it's almost like sort of PPP or something, you know,
Yeah.
politics.
Can I throw something in? I'm smiling thinking about this because I'm about to go
PPE, sorry, PPE.
on a 3-day sort of follow-up to a course that I did here in Bulgaria, in Italy, and on the last day, I'm going to do a workshop in a sommelier school.
Ah,
And
okay.
I'm thinking about this, wow. So, I mean, what on earth am I going to meet there? I mean, it's a school that trains sommelier. And of
That's
course, at the
amazing.
back of my mind, I'm thinking, I hope we get to do a little bit of tasting during the
That's
test
right.
period.
Well,
Coming back to you, I mean, you mentioned the poster at the back there and the post-its.
mm,
Is it the traffic light system? Are you looking at
yeah.
pros and cons and then something in the middle?
Yeah, the different color of the post-its is something about the different aspects of the positivity, if you like. The
Yeah.
CLIL victories, what might they be? That was at the beginning of the course, you know. So I
Okay.
mean that's the point really that not only have you got these, I said PPP, yeah, PPE. I was thinking of the Oxbridge degree now. They're sort of generalists in that sense, but it's a bit more
Okay.
social science, and of course they teach. They're teaching people who've left school. They haven't finished the whole of what we would
Yeah.
call the
Yeah.
sixth form in England. And so there is an obligation not only to do the specific subject that they're studying, might be
Yeah.
engineering, it might be catering, it might be whatever. There's also they have to continue a little bit in what they might have done at school. So they need to know about the Swiss Constitution. So there's politics, there's economics, there's some law as well. But I've got two teachers who teach business and law specifically, and they're not abbots. I've got a historian, so you've got all sorts of stuff here. I've got one
I mean,
language.
can you put in a nutshell how you cope with such a diverse cohort in a group in training? What do you do to provide something for everybody?
Yeah, right. That's the great question. Well, what I do is I establish a kind of end objective for this fairly heterogeneous group, and also in terms of experience as well. So the objective is I want them to go home green, and what I mean is I want them to go home as frogs. I want them to go home as frogs. We've had the frog metaphor on here before, but some folks might not have seen it. What I want to do is I want to turn the subject teachers, and most of them are subject teachers. So no, say it was 50-50. If I had a 50-50 group, which is quite tricky, subject and language
Yeah,
teachers, although it can be great for the collaboration, I would want to turn the subject teachers into not language teachers, but to think about the impact of language on the subject.
yeah,
And I
yeah,
would want the language teachers to think about the impact of content on language on there. Yeah.
yeah,
So I want to make them amphibian. So most of these people are subject teachers. So what I'm trying to get them to think about is the impact of language on their subject, even the Abus, no?
yeah, 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 sure.
And the one language teacher here is picking up stuff, and she's also my kind of, I can put her anywhere. I can put her with anybody, and she can help them.
Okay, okay.
But that's what I'm trying to make them into frogs. I'm trying to make them into more hybrid teachers,
Yeah. So they're
Um,
thinking more about language
right.
in their subjects.
We've said this before, Keith, but I think that the way the world has gone and the way education's gone is it's moving away from not expertise. Of course, we've got to have experts, but it's moving away from what I call a monopedagogic approach. So, I've got a specialist here about catering. Why shouldn't that person who is a specialist in catering, hotel catering, also think about the impact of the language on that? Same as
Yeah,
the guy who's doing systems and technology engineering. I want him to think
yeah.
about the kind of language that occurs. I'm not going to ask him to be a language teacher. I'm just going to make him
Yeah.
into a more
I mean, I
amphibious.
think I understand the amphibian reference. We use it quite a lot, don't we? And
Mm,
it's like bringing two extremes close together, really.
right.
But the German-speaking countries, and I'm referring to Swiss in that way,
Yeah.
Germany and Austria, they're quite special, aren't they, in what
Mm,
they do with vocational education and offering it through English and other languages because they've had, I mean, the Austrian example, it's been going for, I think, 15 years now or
yeah.
so, longer. So it's matured a lot over
Yes.
that time. And even the course materials we wrote for it was like a 12-week period where they would meet on 3 occasions, I think. And I was part of one of those occasions, and you did that as well. But a lot of it was based inside teaching practice. and then come to meetings after the first one to share with assignments that they'd work on. And there are many aspects of INSET that I think are worth talking about. But the one that sticks with me, and I jump on it in my courses in Plovdiv, is getting teachers to make resources and tasks and then try them out and get feedback from each other, their peers, and from me. And one of those things that we do in my school with Erasmus visitors is we visit the classroom, assuming we've got children the age that are relevant for the visiting teachers, and usually that's preschool and primary. They observe something that's been prepared, bespoke for them during the week. We go back to the training room where we talk about, and they've got the notes from the sessions that they've observed and joined in with, and we look at how language was dealt with within the content that was being taught during that lesson. And I think following that, then they're using those ideas to create stuff in the afternoon. And we always follow that structure, Phil. It's sort of lesson visit, talk about the theory and what they've seen of those principles in practice, and then make stuff in the afternoon. What about structure in what you're doing in with the Swiss colleagues there? How do you put the day? Because you've got a whole week.
Yeah, it's like 9 till half 3 really. There's an hour's lunch break. But yeah, the afternoons are 2-hour sessions, and there's 2 1.5-hour sessions in the morning. So again, the training principle is you have to be a little bit careful with that afternoon session, because they get a bit tired. So you make it a bit more gamey, a bit more procedural. But again, each week there's 2 weeks, right? And each week culminates in a task. They're actually preparing the task now. But last week, we're talking a lot about what was it? Well, I'll do this week. I can't remember last week. This week it's called a scaffold rich. So they've got to come up with a scaffold rich lesson, which they're then going to teach. They're not going to teach it. They're going to explain it, but they'll teach a bit of it. They've got to teach something. So we've been going on about scaffolding, and we've said it's a broad term, but we've been trying to demonstrate various techniques and methods of scaffolding in CLIL, and now they've got to themselves take either something they've already taught, which they know is challenging for the students. It's got to be challenging, and again we mean 3-dimensionally challenging. It's challenging conceptually, linguistically, and procedurally, because they're more aware of the language now, and they've got to either adapt that or they can come up with a new lesson, and it's a bit more process than product, Keith, here, because they can't go and visit a school. I'm not so bothered about them going home with things that they can then use. What I want them to go home with is a new framework. It's a frog framework now. So I'm getting so what and they've got to come up with this lesson, and then tomorrow afternoon they're going to present this lesson to another pair and then make them do something. So it's a bit like that, no? It's called a scaffold. It's a scaffold rich lesson. Sorry, the previous week the task was, and again it was in pairs. It was to make language visible. Again, we've been talking about that. Because we were talking about as a subject teacher, how do you make language visible? That is part of your job. That's what we're saying. But you're not going to stand there and explain the structure of a passive. You're going to make it salient and visible in some other way. So they had to take an activity and show again how the language would be made visible, and they actually taught this to another person. So this is cool for subject teachers, because they don't do this kind of thing. They don't do it naturally. And so that's part of making them into frogs. Visible language, and then in the second week,
to take your Post-its poster in the background there as an example, a very simple way of making language visible for talking about advantages and disadvantages, or positives and negatives, and those characteristics that fit in between would be cards for agreement and disagreement, or cards with adjectives that describe positive and negative characteristics, and then while presenting a poster using those, it's I mean, even having them stuck on other Post-its with a different color to place around the clusters of the pros and cons. I do that quite a lot with groups of teachers.
I do that, and I also make a point. Well, again, these are subject teachers. I mean, I could have a group of language teachers in CLIL, and it's a very different scene. You know, we can come
Sure.
on to that maybe, but here it's quite clear what they, what they need to go back with. I think. What were you saying? That
Yeah.
you get them to,
So I mean, I interrupted your point
yeah,
is that their takeaway is that awareness that they take home of
yeah, yeah.
language within their persona as a teacher. That's making them frogs, isn't it? That
Yeah.
awareness.
Well, sorry, the other thing was, yeah, yeah, it's come back now. It was the point that they're not trained to think like this. It's okay.
No,
It's not a
no.
critique, but just the structure of a text.
Yeah,
So the structure of a text, and it could be an oral text, but if their students are presenting, and in certain
yeah,
subjects, it's
yeah,
super important how they present. Business, you've got to present in a certain way. So we look at the structure of a presentation, but an oral presentation, or it could be a written presentation, but it's usually that. So just looking at the structure, what does the first bit consist of linguistically? Well, it's not the same. If you've got three people presenting, the first guy is not going to say the same as the last girl. They're going to say different things. It's
sure,
different
sure.
discourse, just simple functional stuff like that. I leave the CALP, the academic language, they're pretty good on it. They've all got good levels of English. I
Mm.
fine tune a little bit. They still need a bit, and because they've got good levels, they like being corrected. Actually, they
Yeah,
like
yeah.
they're
It's a
interested. Yeah,
common characteristic, isn't it?
yeah. And
Tell me,
yeah, they do. Yes, they like me to correct them, and we've
you know,
been
one thing
trying
I've
to do
noticed
that.
with, I mean, I'm trying to learn Estonian and I'm using my Gemini assistant on my Samsung phone. It's not very good at picking me up on mistakes because it's being so polite, and I have to train it. No, 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 no.
That's
Tell
what
me
it is.
that's wrong.
Yeah. Well, for example, I did an activity. I did an activity in the first week about inventions, gadgets. I think with Stephen Fry, I do to get the three dimensions. You know? And it's interesting because they have to write down very quickly all the objects. And one of the objects is an iron. And everybody, almost all German speakers and Spanish speakers say iron. You know.
Okay,
And
okay.
when I pointed this out to them, they absolutely loved this. Less secure people who are less secure about the language would have been intimidated
Yeah,
by that, but they
yeah,
loved it.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, I've been saying iron for 30 years. I said, well, it's not. It's
Yeah.
pronounced
No,
iron.
no. It's
Don't worry.
amazing thing. And the role of pronunciation takes on its own beast in a way, isn't it?
Yeah.
Amongst the way teachers feel about themselves.
Mm.
And I have a student I work with at the moment who's a dentist, and he's preparing to deliver talks in North America, and I'm working with him on his pronunciation, which is quite chunky. He tends to over-express a lot within his sentences.
Mm.
So I'm actually doing this, with him. I'm talking about how things become fluid by dropping or blending or fusing sounds.
Mm.
And there's a lot of fun to be had in it as well, isn't there?
Yes.
I mean, it's
Oh,
one of the things to mention, obviously, is what goes into the content of a course if we're talking about professional development.
mm.
And I brought up, just wanted to share an example of a course I do online, and it's usually over 10 weeks. We do one a week for 10 weeks. So I look at 3D CLIL, I look at layers of language, then I go into subject-specific vocabulary, looking at multimedia, so non-text media, looking at working with text. We move to output skills, supporting writing, supporting speaking.
Mm.
8 is general academic language because it's got its own kind of animal. Planning lessons, and then networks and projects. That's just an example of content organized into 10 units. There's other stuff as well. Everybody asks about assessment. How do you assess these
Yeah.
students who are doing their curriculum in another language? So I do have a folder, but it's not voluntarily within my collection of things that I offer colleagues. Projects is another one, particularly if I'm working with English teachers, because if they're
Mm.
going to bring more content in,
Yeah.
they need a structured way to look at
Mm.
how to sequence more than one lesson, which we do talk about quite a lot. So, 6, 8 or 10 lessons within a project. So projects is there usually for the language teachers. And I imagine you've got folders like that as well that you
Well,
carry around.
yeah, I mean, that sounds very much like what I do, but interesting you mentioned sequences because again, um, again, I'm not being critical, but language teachers don't really think in sequences because language doesn't work like that. But content subject teachers do. So if you say sequences to subject teachers, they go, duh, yeah, I teach this for 3 weeks and that. But what I do with them, with the subject teachers here, I've already done it. I talk about, okay, what's the impact of language or what's the impact of language on different parts of a sequence? So if you're beginning a sequence in the
Yeah,
orientation part of a sequence, the language is often quite light. The academic language is, there's not much there, and then, but as you get to the middle of the sequence after 2 or 3 weeks, obviously the language has been building up, the academic, the calp has been
yeah,
building up. And by
yeah,
the end of the sequence, as a teacher, you have a right to expect the kids to know some of that or most
mm,
of that
mm,
academic language. And so the way you teach and the language you use and the language you elicit from the students and teach them is very different at different stages of
yeah,
it. So subject teachers don't see that, but they see it after this course.
yeah,
Language teachers know that, but they don't know it in terms of how the content behaves in a sequence. So
yeah,
again,
yeah.
it depends who you're working with, no?
Yeah, it's a
Um,
very valuable point, and I'm glad you put that so clearly that the content teachers are aware of how they sequence the thinking skills in their curriculum, but the language teachers are aware of how they break language down to be able to teach it in units to their students without really, and again, it's not critical, but they don't think about sequence thinking development over
Sequence
a
figures
course of
development. That's right.
lessons.
And if you like some kind of not vertical is it, but it's sort of diagonal increase
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
in the
I want to
complexity.
mention Ruslana Vestelund right now because her systemic functional linguistics approach is all about this visibility of this language and the progression. So, going from, like a more common Bix kind of phrasal verb to a nominalized noun group later is exactly what her work is all about. And we will come back to her because she's been so kind to provide us with some more content for us to get our teeth into.
Yeah.
So I think you're hitting the nail on the head. It's about developing the frog in both the language teacher being more aware of the sequenced approach to
Yeah.
learning in terms of curriculum cognitive skills,
Yep.
but the subject teachers developing a clearer awareness of how the language of that is demanding for their learners.
Yeah, a more language visible approach, let's say. They don't have to be language teachers, but it's a more language visible approach. And if
Yeah.
they're aware of it, then they make the students more aware of it. That's the other thing.
Yeah. The other
Um,
thing I wanted to throw in, I mean, that list of things that are in the folders, I've also got a kind of contents list of how I organize courses for very young learner teachers and primary teachers because I found a study I read several years ago from the UK called the Effective Preschool, Primary and Secondary Education Study, EPPE, and I'll put a link to it in our notes because that gave me a kind of a curriculum for teaching and working with preschool and primary teachers. And I'll quickly go through it. Observation skills, problem solving skills, language in content skills, one-to-one correspondence, number sense, shapes, spatial sense, sets and classifying, ordering and seriation, comparing, patterning, counting, measurement, parts and wholes, numbers and symbols, and graphing. Wow, there's so much there for a language specialist to
yeah.
get hold of and think about how to give learners who are doing all of these things the necessary language to help them express and later write about the concepts within those areas of the curriculum.
Yeah, 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 yeah. No, that sounds good. I mean, you know what I'm like, Keith. I'm a bit of a sort of framework man, no? And I like the in my training sessions or courses. I like them to kind of go home with frameworks that they can then apply. If they're happy
Yeah,
with the framework.
yeah,
Yeah, obviously I do the 3 dimensions. So looking at it, so today they were working on their tasks. They're going to present tomorrow, and I was walking around. We let them, you
yeah.
kind of let them get going, and then I was walking around and I was starting to insist on. I'm saying, okay, at the end of this lesson, what's the outcome? What's the conceptual outcome? And they
Okay.
kind of get it mixed up. So I say, okay, let's try and find the verb. At the end of this lesson, they will, but it'll be an infinitive. To identify the characteristics of business models. And
Sure. Sure.
I say, how are you going to do that? So by ing, and they give me all
Yeah,
the procedures. So
yeah.
I'm trying to train them to do those three-dimensional, well, it's
Say
four-dimensional.
what they are, just for those people who've not heard or seen us before. What are the three dimensions?
Well, the top line is conceptual. Okay, so what are they conceptually going to take from this lesson? Business models, in this case. There's
Yeah,
the group over there who's doing that.
yeah,
They're going to
yeah,
learn about, and they're going to learn. It's more than that. They're going to learn to differentiate among business models. That's the concept. All right.
yeah, yeah,
Procedure in the middle. Buy. How are we going to do this? We're going to buy, giving them examples, by looking at
yeah,
texts,
yeah,
by doing lots of stuff. There's even a game in there somewhere.
yeah,
Buy, and then the third dimension at the bottom is using
yeah,
inherent language. So you just say inherent vocabulary because you're not going to list it all. The inherent vocabulary of business models plus some kind of grammar. So I don't think there's any opinion language here. But I don't think they have to express opinions. Probably the language of differentiation. They might
maybe.
have to compare and contrast or
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
Not quite
And
sure.
then I mean, so you're creating that awareness of those three dimensions during those activity types with teachers,
Well, they
and
love
that
it, kid. Because they
well, that
love
was
it.
at the heart of the book, wasn't it? That
Yeah, yeah.
we really all agreed, you, John, and I, when we sat down and divvied out the work, that that's what brought it all together.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
they wouldn't let us call ourselves the three wise monkeys, unfortunately, but that would have been quite nice as well, wouldn't
We're
it?
monkeys, but we're not very wise. But yeah, I know. Yeah.
But then thinking about the products, you were saying that they go away with an awareness and become more frog-like.
Mm.
I'm really fixed on this materials writing with teachers
Mm.
because of the Erasmus need for further dissemination and
Yes.
further cascading. And
Mm.
it just seems to make perfect sense that it's a very long process. I'm going to go to Turin at the end of May with the paper copy of stuff that these teachers produced here in October, so it's a long process, but it's kind of curated and edited and shaped into something that they all get a personal copy. A PDF will go on the website, and
Yeah.
then it can be further shared with other networks of teachers who are preschool and primary teachers interested in the UN SDGs, which is the latest collection that we put together. So I think, within this world of not reinventing the wheel, but creating stuff that's ready for people to take and have a look at and make their own.
Mm.
Part of our job is allowing colleagues the space to be creative, and particularly in the afternoon sessions where they've done all the practice and the theory, and they can have a bit of self time to be creative.
Yeah, I think we could, we've talked about this here, and you could, I think, base the structure of this course, for example, and you could make it like that. You could make the second week like that. I just felt that, and I think that I'm fairly endorsed by having seen these guys and gals for 8 days. I think that it's the frameworks that will work for them, and I think that maybe these people, when they're back in Switzerland, they can work together and make materials. We could change the title of the course and say, writing materials for for vocational education, and it would be a different course. I would teach it like you. I would do it a bit differently. I would kind of,
Yeah,
I'd still give them frameworks, but I'd have them writing under those, like the
yeah.
criteria you're talking about. Yeah, I just don't think that's quite the objective for this course. But
Sure, sure. Well, let me put you on the spot then, because we're coming towards the end of our 30-minute block
mm,
that we promised we'd try and stick to.
yeah.
If you've got a very short thing to prepare, knowing all the things you do about CLIL, what do you usually feel is worth and more valuable to package into an hour or a 90-minute online slot that you've got to deliver? Are there things that you usually hone in on and say, I'm going to do that now?
I do what we've said, Keith. If we've got 90 minutes, I say, consider this model. consider your teaching from this model. It's actually 4 dimensions. I said, let's have a look at it. I do a little activity and I said,
Okay.
just consider the way you teach using those dimensions. I think you do that as well. And
Yeah.
it works. It has worked for a long time now. I'm kind of pleased with the way it
So
works.
you're again. Let's be clear about the fourth dimension because I know what it is, but you're talking about attitudinal competence, aren't
Yes, yes, and sometimes that can also become that can itself be the top line because
you?
that's what you're trying to do. That's actually the concept. The
Yeah.
attitude can become the concept. It's quite interesting. Your the Bulgarian lesson that I showed them in the first week, I showed them the famous tire. I said, well, what's the outcome of this class? What's the outcome? It's an English class. Well, and a lot of them came out with attitudinal ideas. To
Yeah.
care for the
Sure.
environment.
Sure.
You
A
know,
healthy plant.
yeah, healthy plant, all that sort of stuff, or caring for things, make it more general.
It
That
brings us nicely back to the tomatoes because I'm afraid of destroying these tomatoes that these kids gave me, but they're so healthy. We've got like 20 centimeter growth. I'm already pinching off the sucker parts of the plants, and I'm going to take down some of these now back to the classroom for these kids. And
I
I
was going to
think,
say, can't you just have a tomato party or something?
well, they
Um,
will come. We're going to do that. They
yeah,
will come and
yeah.
visit because we go in the forest. They do like a forest lesson day. But now we'll come and have lunch in my garden. We'll go in the polytunnel. We'll try and aim for it to be at the time when they can actually pick stuff from the plant that came from their seeds. And I think in a way that's quite a nice thought to draw us to a close, isn't it? That CLIL it's more content focused here in looking at beginnings and endings of cyclical curriculum sequences. And that's not being critical of the language or language teaching world, but it is a nudge. Let's do more of this because these kids scooped out these seeds. We're talking about way back when this happened. They did this, and they were warming in tissue paper in my pantry where the boiler is. And, this sort of approach to content is what CLIL is all about, I think. It's joined up thinking over the year rather than a lesson.
I think that we should end on a song. I wrote a song for the primary ones about seeds. Seeds grow into flowers, seeds grow into trees. Give them rain and sunshine, give them birds and bees. Like that. Yeah, there you go.
Fantastic. I'm going to steal that. I hope you don't mind.
No, no, play it on a ukulele.